In the 7th grade, I, prodded by my girlfriends, crossed a dance floor and asked Float to dance with me. He said no, and then he and all of his friends started laughing. When I shared that story with my husband years later, his reaction wasn't what I expected. A guy named Float didn't want to dance with you? Wow. Float was a story that was revisited time and time again, like when 20 of my female debate students wanted to have a sleepover at my house. And I said yes, and they had a blast until they didn't. And at that time, they started reliving some of their middle school horror stories of rejection. Mother Teresa was known for the letters that she wrote that illustrated the despair that she felt. She was always imploring her superiors to explain to her why she felt so unloved, so repulsed, and so empty. It was a terrible, terrible place to be, but I understood it because I was dealing with high schoolers who were feeling the very same thing. I taught communication, debate, and theater. All classes intended to increase the confidence in my students. But what I found in the conversations I had with them was that they never, ever felt that they really measured up. They never, ever felt that they were valued. And one activity in particular demonstrated just how much damage had been done to their confidence since they had first entered kindergarten. In my speech class with high school juniors, they had an assignment every year. And they were to write questions for kindergartners. We would walk the 5 blocks to the elementary school. They would be paired one-on-one with a 5-year-old. They would go out to the courtyard. My student would ask them questions, and then they would write their answers. I compiled some of my favorites. For instance, if you didn't brush your teeth, what would happen? You'd get a hairball. If you could eat anything in the world, what would it be? My legs, so I wouldn't have to walk. How old are your parents? They're both 214. Do you have a pet? I had a pet fish, but it died and I put it in the trash can. Oh, did it go to heaven? No, I told you it went in the trash can. What is love? I'm not supposed to talk about stuff like that. There wasn't any question that they couldn't answer. There wasn't anything they couldn't do. If my student asked them if they could sing, they would jump up, throw their arms in the air, and sing A, B, C. Jesus, can you dance? I can do the moonwalk. Johnny can do it better, but I can do it some. Can you dribble? Yes, I could dribble. 3-pointers. There wasn't anything they couldn't do. What my students didn't know was that 2 weeks before that, I had asked them questions in class, questions to which I knew the answers. Can anybody in here spike a volleyball? Can anybody ride a bull? Can anybody in here play the violin? There was no eye contact. Now, I taught in a small town in southeast Kansas, so some of these questions probably couldn't be asked in your neighborhood. Can anybody sew? Can anybody drive a tractor? Nobody could do anything. So following the kindergarten activity, we had a chance to dialogue about what had happened at kindergarten versus the questions I had asked them 2 weeks before. And when I asked them who had taken from them the confidence that those kindergartners had, the answers were always the same. It was either a parent or a teacher or a coach or a clergy person or a bully or even a friend. And when I asked them why they had ever given anybody the power to make them lose their confidence, they had no answer, but I realized probably the same reason I did for far too long. The word for fear of rejection is anthropophobia. It means that you are afraid of being unaccepted by other people. And when that happens, you enter into the world of if-onlys. If only I were thinner, younger, taller, richer, stronger, smarter, more creative. There's always an if only. But that starts us into the world of comparisons. And I love how Teddy Roosevelt put it. Comparison is the thief of joy. Because if we fear that we don't measure up, we are always going to risk giving the fear of rejection undue negative power in our lives. But what if we flip that script? What if we stop to think, maybe there are some good things that can come out of these rejection experiences? And that's what I want to share with you today, the 3 rewards of rejection. Reward number 1, you're going to be humbled. Rejection can teach you humility. I was a substitute teacher in Texas when we first moved there at the high school level. But then I got a call one day to teach in a Christian kindergarten class, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a breath of fresh air. Those little darlings are going to be so much fun to talk to and deal with. Walked in the classroom, there were no lesson plans, so I did what any teacher would do. I asked the kids, okay, can somebody tell me how we start the day? Little girl raised her hand. Hi there, darling, what's your name? My name's Betsy. Hi, Betsy. Betsy, how do we start the day? We pray. Oh, okay, everybody bow your head and I'll pray. No, you don't pray. You don't pray. You pick somebody to pray. Little horns were starting to spout from Betsy's head at that time. Okay, I pick, what's your name? No, you cannot pick her because she got to pray yesterday. Well, now I wouldn't know that, would I, Bossy Betsy? It's what I wanted to say. Of course, I didn't. Christian school and all. Once the prayer was over, then I had to ask again, now what do we do? Now we, Betsy, raise your hand. Oh, okay. Now we take the milk count. Oh, okay, how many of you guys want milk? No, no, no. How many times do I have to tell? Like, who is the teacher here? But by now, the students were chiming in with her, and there was going to be a little mutiny if this went much further. You can't do it that way. You have to do chocolate and white milk. Okay, now, Betsy, I wouldn't have known that. Now, would I have? But thank you so much. So got the milk count straightened out. And then, of course, I was smart enough to ask Betsy to choose the person to take the milk count to the office. She chose Ryan, who had never been chosen before, for good reason, because Ryan just didn't come back to the classroom. Until an aide brought him back about 30 minutes later after he had visited the cafeteria ladies 3 times, gone into the bathroom twice, and wandered the halls. That was the best part of my day. It was downhill from there. It was. And when I got home, I told my husband, okay, I am the worst substitute teacher in the history of the world. Had those kids if they had blow darts, I would have been plastered to a cork board today. And he said, Patty, you're giving kids that don't even come up to your thighs the power to make you feel incompetent? Well, that's your choice. And I imagine your experience with rejection has nothing to do with kindergartners. I hope not. But there is always a lesson that we can learn when we do feel rejection. When we're either left aside, nobody wants us in their group, or when we're overachievers, or whatever they call us to not include us in their little organization. Because there are questions we can ask ourselves. Is there something I could have done differently? Do I have some obnoxious habits that need to be changed? Do I talk too much? Do I talk too loud? Is there maybe a chance that I need to diversify my life so I have something to offer? Maybe I complain too much, but I will tell you the one thing that I notice more than anything is that when we talk to people, we don't value them. We're waiting for them to value us. And when we enter into their story, when we make them feel important, we have a much better chance of not being rejected. The second reward of rejection is that we will find who we can trust. We will find whom we can trust. My son Adam was a professional baseball player, and he quit to join the fight against sex trafficking. They rescued a young gal, and they brought her to our town for safekeeping until they could find a facility where she had to go. And I was allowed to meet that young girl and talk to her. And I realized then there's a level of rejection that I can't begin to understand. She shared her story with me, and she had been locked in a closet, chained to a pole, and she was the sex toy for 5 men in their poker games. This had gone on for months before she was rescued. Now, most of us are not going to deal with that level of rejection, but I can tell you when she learned that she could trust my son, Adam, and his wife, Jen, and the team surrounding them, she knew she was safe. And to this day, she's thriving, and she's doing great because of those people that she could trust. But most of us aren't going to deal with that. Most of us are going to deal with things like people who build themselves up by tearing us down. In the classes that I taught, I constantly was talking about bullying, which had become huge, especially with social media. And I always told my students, there's one thing you need to do if somebody's bullying you. Just look them in the eye or text them back. What power are you getting out of trying to make me feel bad about myself? How does this build you up to make me feel bad? So we talked about that a lot. And one morning, Jessie came running into my classroom and she was out of breath. She goes, Mrs. LaRoche, I have to tell you what happened on the school bus yesterday. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. You know how we talked about bullying? Well, it happened. And a 12-year-old was bullying a 6-year-old and she was calling her fat and ugly. And I got out of my seat because the little 6-year-old was crying. And I sat down behind the bully and I said, how come you think you're a big shot trying to do that? She said, I couldn't remember the words that you said, but I was trying to say something kind of like that. And I thought, but you were so close, you were so close. And she said, she told me to blank off. And then she called me a bunch of names and she started cussing and everything. But I stuck to my guns and I kept saying, no, I'm serious. Well, how does this make you feel good about yourself? You're making this little girl cry. And then she said, but when I got home last night, the bully's mother called me. And she said, how dare you talk to my daughter like that? And she said, my daughter has freedom of speech. If she wants to call that little girl fat and ugly, she can, because that little girl is fat and ugly. And I'm looking at Jessie and I just went, oh my gosh, Jessie, well, that apple didn't fall too far from that tree, did it? She had no idea what an apple and a tree had to do with a school bus, but of course, once I explained that, I said, so would you do it again? Would you do it again? She goes, yes, I'm going to do it every single time I find somebody being bullied. And I said, then you just showed that little 6-year-old whom she could trust. I am so proud of you. The third reward of rejection is that it can redirect our lives. Last month I was talking to a very successful venture capitalist, and he shared with me that he would never hire anybody to head one of his companies unless they first had failed at a startup company, because that failure would be a learning experience and be the key to their future success. You see, when you get to the point where you are not going to allow anybody to demean you or devalue you, you're going to start taking risks. Maybe you've always wanted to start a daycare. Maybe you wanted to start trying out for the church choir. Maybe you just need to stand up to an abusive person in your family. Maybe you need to say no to an unhealthy relationship. Whatever that is, you're going to take those risks. And you know what? You're going to find that hurting people hurt people. My husband coached for over 30 years in professional baseball after his career was finished pitching. We were in the minor leagues for most of that time, and I made so many longtime friends. And then we went to the major leagues. I'm not going to tell you what team. It doesn't matter, but those wives were not friendly. They were little divas. The money had gotten better and bigger, and they didn't give me a chance, and I just wanted to stand up at the ballpark and go, I'm really fun. Just give me a chance. But my husband told me that would be really awkward, and he'd probably get fired, so I wasn't allowed to do that. But they weren't nice. And so I went home that off season and I just started going, gosh, what do I need to do differently? This is not going to be fun. We're going back there again next year. And then I started praying about it. I realized, oh my gosh, I'm expecting them to fill my tank. Maybe I need to be filling their tank. Maybe instead of this being all about me, I need to try to include them and maybe find some harmony on the team. There were a couple of things I did pretty well. I'd been a competitive softball player and I had led numerous Bible studies in the minor leagues. And I thought, you know what, maybe I can do that. So I called Grace, who was the head of the Wives for this organization, and I asked her about my ideas, and she got on board. She was so excited. She said, oh my gosh, I'll organize the softball games, and we'll play against other teams, and guess what? We'll take the money that we make, and we'll put that towards some battered women's shelter, and I'll find a conference room at the ballpark for your Bible study. She was all on board. Met her opening night. She introduced me to all the new wives. There were several, but a lot of the old ones were there, but this time they were all on board. They were all excited about both the Bible study and the softball team. And then she pointed to Sharon, who was sitting up by herself. I was emboldened and excited and empowered, and I marched up those stairs and I knelt beside Sharon and I said, hi, are you Sharon? What's your point? I think she was Bossy Betsy's mother, but I'm not sure. And all of a sudden, though, I just started stuttering like a jackhammer, and I lost all my confidence. She was loud, and fans around her were looking at this dialogue. And I went, oh my gosh, she thinks I'm a fan, and I'm here to bug her. And I said, oh, I'm not a fan. My husband's the pitching coach. And your husband said, what is your point? And all of a sudden, I was back on that dance floor after Float told me he didn't want to dance with me, walking back to my girlfriends. But then I realized, no, I'm not going to give you this power. I'm not going to let you do this to me. And I stood up. And I said, well, I don't have a point. I was just going to invite you to my Bible study, and I was going to start a softball team with the wives. I thought maybe you'd want to join, but I can see you're not interested. Thanks for your time. And I turned and I walked down about 3 steps, and over my shoulder I heard her say, "I'd love to join." And I went, "Over my dead body." But it was a Bible study, so I really couldn't have that attitude. That could bite me. But you know what? Sharon ended up being the best softball player on the team. She was our third baseman. She would dive for balls and break her pretty little acrylic nails. She, of course, had never had children, so she looked really cute in her uniform, so people paid to come and watch her play. She wasn't going to miss a Bible study. But you know what? It wasn't too long after that I couldn't stand it. I had to ask her because I really had anger towards her. And I walked up to her and I said, "I've just got to ask you this, Sharon." I said, "You totally humiliated me in front of all those fans, and you did that on purpose. What was that all about?" And she said, "I came from a team where they weren't nice to black people." They were black. And she said, "I was determined that if I ever went to another team, the first white person that ever talked to me was going to pay a price. And you were that white person." And I said, "Well, lucky me." No surprises there. And we both started laughing, and we became friends. And I realized hurting people hurt people. So if you've come here today and you bought into the lie that you don't measure up, please, please listen to what I've shared with you today. Sometimes in those horrible, horrible episodes of rejection, maybe you're just being humbled. Maybe you're finding whom you can trust, and maybe you're being directed, or just maybe, it's a hurting person hurting you. Because for whatever it's worth, you are unique individuals, you are valued, and you matter. And don't let anybody ever tell you differently. As my husband said, it's your choice. Thank you, and God bless.